Again, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Appreciate coming out to Zoomtopia 3. Appreciate having you all here. Hope you have a good week. I know there's lots of good content, our session and others. We believe we have over 80 different sessions that you can attend this year, 22 on just conference rooms. So if you got questions about what ones may be best to go to, definitely here to help you answer those. Hope you get all the content you want to today. Today in this session, I'm Dan Kurzman, Senior Sales Engineer. Been with Zoom for about 3 years. I'm joined with my colleague Josh, also a Senior Sales Engineer. He's a little behind me, a little over 2 now.
2, yep.
Yeah, so both of us are kind of unique in our sales engineer team because we came from customers. We were you several years ago. Both of us have deployed thousands of Zoom users, hundreds of rooms across the country. And we're brought our knowledge to Zoom, and now we're here to bring it to you. So today, the conference room revolution, the journey to Zoom from your Cisco, Lifesize, other standards-based codecs. Again, a little bit about us. You can take down our emails if you have questions. We're always here to help you afterwards as well, so feel free to reach out. Let's talk about conference room technology. If you're like most of our customers, you fit into this graphic here, or especially most of our early customers just coming onto Zoom. 20% of conference rooms and organizations are actually video enabled today. That means 80% are blank. Maybe they have a cable on the wall on the TV and you walk in and plug in. They're just not user friendly. And an interesting statistic that I learned recently from Frost & Sullivan, by 2023, 73% of all video meetings will occur in huddle rooms. So those other 80%, we can quickly attack those with things like you saw in our keynote today. These new appliance-based kits, these all-in-one drop-in for just a couple $1,000s, have your rooms up. So now those other 80% are fully video-enabled. They're being used by your users. They're easy, that Zoom experience. But what about those other 20? Traditionally, using standards-based endpoints were not easy for the end user in the conference room. Maybe they even had to have IT there all the time to help get that meeting started, to troubleshoot throughout. So years ago, Zoom brought our conference room connector. We wanted to make it able to join those Zoom meetings, but it still wasn't user-friendly. So we recently, about a year and a half, has it been 3 years for Interop now? Interop was not very popular 3 years ago, but with all the features and functionality, bringing that user experience to the codec-based rooms, we want to make it super simple. Today, Josh is going to do a deep dive in how we set up that process, enable your codecs to register to Zoom to bring that one-touch experience to the conference rooms. So I'm going to let Josh deep dive in, and then we're going to do a little user demo for how they'll experience it from booking a room in their Outlook all the way through walking into that conference room.
All right, so I'm just going to hop into the Zoom portal. So like anything else, I'm going to live out of that single pane of glass for Zoom, right? So one of the things that we're talking about, obviously, is the Cisco Polycoms room tab, this ability to provision those, like Dan said, traditional endpoints. And let's go ahead and hop into our portal. And so again, I've just logged into my Zoom portal here, or actually I've logged out. So I log back in. You can see just my standard profile page here. It's similar to anything else that you have. Some of you are very familiar with this. We're going to actually go down into room management. And we've made a conscious effort to group all of these together, right? So regardless of whether it's Zoom rooms or Cisco Polycom rooms, you're going to kind of live in the same area. So going into the Cisco Polycom room tab, we're going to just have some populated fields here. We have a couple of rooms already configured. And before I hop into this, I'd like to talk about the common constraints and things that you'll need to have in place before you get into the API connector. So our interoperability requires a Windows 64-bit server, usually sitting somewhere in your DMZ, that can talk to the subnet that those endpoints reside on. So essentially what we're trying to do is provision out some settings and configurations and make it very easy to manage those devices directly from this Zoom portal. So no longer do you have to go out to your TMS or your VCSs or anything like that. You're going to actually do everything from within Zoom. So really just making that even easier to manage everything under that one umbrella. So,
and I'd like to add to that, this is a shared services. You don't need to go buy a new box. You don't need hardware to do this. You can take an existing server, install our API connector on it. It's a lightweight application. It's going to run in the background, so it doesn't need its own hardware to get done. It's just going to allow you to use what you have to keep using Zoom simpler.
Yep. And TCP 443 connectivity is going to be really kind of the key component. And then for the calendaring part, so one of the things that we use the interoperability in Zoom for is to really streamline that workflow, right? Your users have maybe Zoom rooms today, maybe you have some of those Cisco endpoints. We have the one touch to join experience in Zoom rooms, but we have to walk into that traditional Cisco room and dial meeting ID at zoomcrc.com or something like that, right, to gain entry. It's not always the easiest thing to do depending on what the human interface device is in that room. So sometimes it's a Crestron that's custom programming, sometimes it's the little Cisco remote, all really cumbersome experiences to dial a long dial string, right? So this box we introduced, put it into your DMZ, we're able to provision that one button to start experience to the Cisco Polycom room. So able to actually provision calendar invites via a room resource that we attach using this API connector. So I'm gonna hop into that a little bit now. But again, I have my API connector already up and running, so it's safe to assume that I have the constraints filled as far as this Windows 64-bit box, and then the firewall rules needed, as well as the service account and room resources accounts that I'm going to attach to my codecs. So I'm going to actually just hop in here and show you kind of what the API connector is and does. It's very simple, very lightweight. It's really just sort of a relaying device that allows our cloud, your Exchange server, or 365 or G Suite to all communicate together. So basically, when you go to install this box, we define a subnet that those endpoints are going to reside on. This just points the API connector to that subnet so that we can discover those codecs and then speak with them over TCP 443. So moving on into the Rooms tab now, and this is really where the meat of everything comes in, right? And I can see my codecs here. We have a couple of codecs that we've already added. We have a DX80 and a Polycom Trio as well. We're going to focus on the Cisco experience today. So this DX80, you can see I have full capabilities to get into the admin UI. I can see different components of that room. I can see the calendar. So if I wanted to click down and actually see my upcoming meetings, I can see all of that there as well. But I'm going to actually dive into the configuration page of this codec. So you can see we have some different components filled out here. Obviously, we have a room name. We've defined a type, right? So you have a capability to define different types of codecs there. We do recommend that you're on a firmware version that's from hopefully this century or something like that, right? To make sure that it's gonna work. We can't sometimes communicate with some of those older revs. Had people call up and say, hey, I'm on 1.3 or something like that. And I'm like, ugh.
And of course, all those details are found in our documentation on the support site. We're going to cover what devices are supported for this functionality, what versions of firmware are needed, etc.
So we're just providing some standard information here, right? So serial number, an admin username and password to be able to log in and provision that codec, and then the IP address. So really, these are all pretty standard things. That's just setting the table so that we can actually speak to that codec. And then from there, you can really get into the meat of the configuration, which is going to be about call registration. So there's a lot of different options available there, depending on what your current environment is. We see a lot of customers that have some mixture of VCS and CUCM or RPAD or something like that, and they want to leave some of that in place. Or maybe they're at some point in their contractual agreement with that company that it doesn't make a lot of sense to sunset that yet. So we can do what's called enabled not registered. It's a default setting that allows us to basically make Zoom calls, provision that one button to press experience, but we can still leverage your existing infrastructure. So if you are under contract and paying for that stuff and you want to continue to leverage it, you can do so. However, our full goal would be to get you over to Zoom registration, where we can eliminate that infrastructure altogether and you can have a full Zoom ecosystem experience. So we do have multiple options here beyond just enable not registered and register directly to Zoom. We have some configurations that will allow you to do dual registration on certain devices depending on capabilities and things like that. We do have a session about the Poly Trio coming up after this. I would encourage you to attend as well. We use this same component to actually provision and manage those devices. So very cool stuff. And a lot of it, that's where you're gonna really save that CapEx expenditure, right? Is if you wanted to extend the life of that infrastructure or those codecs that you've installed maybe within the last 5 or 10 years. Now you put Zoom in there as a nice overlay for that, and you have a great user experience, right? Everybody's used to joining a Zoom meeting. It's one button to press experience. So regardless of the technology that's running in the background, your end users go in and do the same workflow. They book the same meeting from Outlook, invite that same room resource, and then go in and start the meeting.
And again, that's really what this is all about. You don't want to walk into that conference room and have to dial an IP address and a meeting number or know the CPURI. The concept here is by setting this up in advance, registering your endpoints through the Zoom API connector, your users are going to have that more Zoom room-like experience where I can just walk in there and hit the start button.
Absolutely. So we do have some configuration capabilities around H323 as well. We don't see nearly as much H323 dialing, but it is there. We do have those capabilities. The next thing that I really want to focus on is the calendar. So the calendar, this is going to be a room resource, so that lives in your G Suite or O365 or Exchange environment. A lot of times this might already exist, right? Your users book a conference room today, it just doesn't necessarily go anywhere. So we could attach this room resource to this codec so that when we send it an invite, it's just going to show up on that on-screen display. So this is going to be the room resource that you'll see me invite later on when I get into the Office 365 environment, make it a Zoom meeting. And then send that invite along. So just make note of that, Zoomtopia breakout session at zoomineer.com. So some other configurable fields here as far as always provisioning a join button here. Ad hoc meeting, you have the capabilities to assign different provisionings of those buttons where that would show up on that device depending on what the device is. A lot of them, like I said, will have a touch 10 or something like that where we're really trying to configure that to be super easy. So
a lot of my customers ask, why do I want that always add a join button? So let's say someone booked that conference room, but they haven't been using Zoom very much yet. They forgot to use our Outlook plugin and put that meeting invite into the invite for that room. So they walk in there and there's no join button. By adding this join button, they'll join it. It'll still take to the splash page. They'll have to put in the meeting number. We still are simplifying the process from before of them having to walk in and what IP address do I dial? What's the CPURI? So even if they forgot to use our plugin when scheduling their meeting, we're still simplifying that meeting experience by being able to put that join button on there for every meeting.
Yep, and we do have some advanced options in there as well. I'm not going to dive into all of the advanced options, but we have a great deal of configuration components that you can change on the room level to be able to kind of customize the management of those rooms depending on their locale or what type of room they are and things like that. So that's really how you would add a room, go in and look at the room. And then from there, one thing that I like to hit on is the calendar credentials tab. So when you put in that room resource, we're actually going to go out and auto-discover your O365 or Exchange tenancy or G Suite tenancy and provide back here the domain tenancy so that we can provide those service account credentials that has full delegation access to that room resource. Because we're actually going to leverage that delegation access of Daniel.Kurzman at zoomineer.com.
I'm a service account.
Yeah, Dan's a service account. We're going to leverage Dan's permission to access the room resource calendar. So that's really kind of the key component there. A lot of times we see SVC_Zoom admin or something like that as the service account, right? And it's just got full delegation access to all your room resources that we're going to assign out.
And you've heard Josh say service account multiple times. Best practice, don't use a user. Typically, our IT department makes us change our passwords every 90 days. So if you do that, this is going to fail. This is a demo setup. So I'm a service account today. But as you're doing your rooms, have an actual service account that has the delegation permissions to your room resources. Don't use a user, please.
Yeah, that's a great point. We've had companies, that have used a user account and reached out and said, "Hey, this person left the company. We need to rebuild our calendar connection." It's not a super difficult thing, but it's not something you want to come in on a Monday and do. So. Service account, best practice there. We have capability to support impersonation as well as delegation. Delegation is still typically the component that I see used most often, but if you use impersonation in your Exchange or O365 environment today, we have the capability to support that as well. Additional options here, we have capabilities to actually parse different SIP URIs and things like that. So if you send over a meeting invite that has a SIP URI in it, you could actually provision that as well. So different options as far as processing goes. I see a lot of the hide topic, hide agenda, or changing the default topics here for different types of rooms, right, or different organizations. I see a lot of FinServ organizations that want to privatize everything, right, and maybe it just says, hey, there's an upcoming meeting here, and that's it. So, but there is still the capability to one button to join that meeting.
And this section is actually really important, Josh. I encounter this a lot with my customers, that privatizing of meetings. If you don't have the join URL in the body of the email and the subject, it's not going to work on your endpoint. So that's why we give you the options in here, because I know a lot of customers will strip that out at the Exchange side And if the Exchange invite has no detail in it, we don't know how to process it. We can't put the join URL on your endpoint. So don't privatize it the Exchange side. Do it through your calendar credential setup, because here we can make sure that shows up as Josh's meeting or just Zoom meeting or whatever kind of private setting you want there.
Absolutely, yeah. And one of the most common, issues I will say that we run into is, hey, we're seeing the calendar invites on the controller, but there's no join button there, right? And it's because they've scrubbed away or sanitized those invites as they process through the Exchange environment. So that's a very good point. Thank you. And that's really about all there is to it. So typically this is something that I can do with a customer. We can get a couple of endpoints provisioned within 20 to 30 minutes. So that's pretty good. I can't think of another solution that would allow you to manage third-party devices in such a short period of time and so effectively as well. So moving on from the actual interoperability site here, I'm going to actually go into my O365 environment here where you can see my Outlook calendar. So probably everybody in this room has Outlook or Google or something like that that they live in pretty religiously for their calendars, right? We're all on our phones all day. This is basically going to be an easy way for you to book these meetings, right? And I have a couple of test invites already on.
Before you book, can you go back and just zoom in on the day instead of the full month view?
Absolutely.
So we can see there's a couple meetings on the calendar that Josh has booked already.
Where's my
view? There you go, day.
Perfect.
So we got a couple meetings on there. I'm going to switch over to this camera. As we can see, we got a couple meetings here. We've got 12 o'clock, 12:30. We had some stuff that fell off the calendar earlier. There was an 11 o'clock on there. There's a few more. Oh, no more today. But you can see meeting here that launched at 12 o'clock. And again, if we take a look at Josh's calendar, we see that 12 o'clock there. So we're going to book live right now. We're going to book a new meeting. We're going to show you using Outlook, using our Outlook add-in. Going to book a meeting. We're going to put the Zoom information in there. And we should see that pop up here on the endpoint within a moment. And then we'll be able to launch that meeting. So this is going to be your end user experience. They're working their calendar. They're booking their meetings. They're making them Zoom meetings. And they're going to walk to that conference room to launch that meeting.
And just the important step that I always seem to miss when I'm doing demos is you want to actually invite the room resource that you want the calendar to show up on. So perfect. And I'm going to go ahead and hit send, just like I would for anything else.
And let's switch back to the endpoint here. And sometimes, oh, there it went right away.
So now you can see we have the meeting invite showing up on the codec. We can simply walk into the room and press join. So now we're actually in the Zoom meeting that I've just booked moments ago. It showed up instantly and you're one button to press in. So
it's all about that user experience. It can't get any simpler than that. Yes, question?
Sure. So I think the
Other than the infrastructure advantage, I understand. Is there any features?
as far as I'm concerned, I don't believe so. I think that typically it's a standards-based SIP H323 call out to our cloud. So so you're not really going to lose anything there in terms of the infrastructure and things like that. The biggest piece is getting up the firewall rules, managing those calls a little bit differently, thinking of everything as a Zoom meeting, right? So that's why we have a lot of success is because we're dialing outbound. We don't necessarily have to deal with some of the firewall rules or the traversal or the other components that traditional systems have dealt with, right? They'll put a piece on the inside of the firewall, outside of the firewall, and then do that pass-through for it. We don't do that. We'll do it directly through the firewall. So we have a great success story there as far as feature set and availability goes. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Thank you. Is it on? Yeah. Okay. So the API connector, can that be installed in multiple instances globally?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a couple different ways to do that. We have a high availability setup that you can install. So basically, you can install the same API connector ID on 2 different server boxes. So that's for failover. And then we have capabilities to install the API connector in different regions, different subnets, and things like that, and manage those global fleet, right? So I have a customer that has, I think, 5 API connectors deployed in, APAC, EMEA, United States, Mexico, and I can't remember the 5th place now. But yes, absolutely.
At the very beginning, you saw Josh talk about defining a subnet. So you can have multiple API connectors that can interface with different subnets. If you don't have, a centrally managed server that can get to all those subnets where your endpoints are. So you actually, yes, can deploy multiple of them. You can do high availability by putting the same connector ID on multiple instances of it. We're going to do a deeper Q&A at the end. We actually have our developer, that program manager,
Product architect.
product architect, thank you, who designed all this and developed for us 3 years ago, continues to enhance it and bring more features to it. He'll be up here to join us for Q&A. Before we get into that, we wanted to bring up a guest speaker. We brought one of Josh's customers along with us today to talk about his experience, his journey into Zoom, and how his conference rooms and the whole Zoom experience worked out for him.
All right. You want to come up?
You want to introduce him, Josh?
Yeah. Please, everybody, welcome Kyle Almenmoss, who is the Director of Employee Technology Engagement at Pandora and SiriusXM. He's going to talk to us today a little bit about his journey. I know he has experience with, all things Zoom, so I'm just going to get out of his way and kind of let him run with it.
Never get out of my way, Josh, please. He was instrumental. Thank you. Pandora's journey from Cisco to Zoom started about 3 years ago, starting with a lengthy year-long evaluation period for which Zoom was very patient, so thanks for that. We fell into that bucket of having about 20% of our total conference rooms outfit with Cisco hardware, with a pretty extensive Cisco infrastructure, redundant MCUs, VCS control, VCS expressway, TMS for management, etc. Way too many other cloud platforms that we are leveraging from a video collaboration and audio conferencing standpoint. So after evaluating Zoom, implementing a few Zoom rooms, we decided, hey, this is for us. We wanted to make the switch. So we started down the path of deploying more Zoom rooms, deprecating our Cisco endpoints and infrastructure. And so that's where the API connector came into play. Yes, we're on this path of deprecation, but we're not just going to throw all of our hardware away right away. So we deploy the API connector, initially just with the one button to push functionality, just to align the user experience between our growing Zoom room footprint and our declining Cisco footprint. And then we started doing full registration, full management, to the point where we're doing pretty much everything within the Zoom portal and with the API connector managing our endpoints. So it's pretty much allowed us to, at this point now, quadruple we've gotten to the point where 80-90% of our conference rooms are outfit with mostly Zoom rooms, or a combination of Zoom and our declining Cisco rooms. And our call volume we saw also quadrupled in that time, just because of the scalability that Zoom enabled for us. So, but the API connector was key in enabling us to make that decision to get to a path of deprecation that we could plan for, and still leverage our existing hardware. And the big component of that as well is that our cost to Cisco in terms of our smart net renewals and support also declined to the point of now being zero. So we still do have some infrastructure out there, but we're essentially at the point of saying, hey, we don't need to pay Cisco to support it anymore. If anything dies, we have all the replacements from the devices we've deprecated already. So we've eliminated our cost footprint to Cisco, and the volume and scale of our video conferencing infrastructure is literally quadrupled. So that's essentially our story.
So there was a feature we didn't touch on when Josh was in the portal there. Some of the other capabilities we give you through that registering of rooms. You guys leverage the fact that you can access the admin portal of each individual endpoint from your Zoom portal, giving you that single pane of glass to manage your conference rooms worldwide now.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, we actually still have TMS deployed on our server and never touch it. We actually still have VCS there for a few use cases, just for some integrations where there are PBX, but never touch them either. All of our management is all within the Zoom portal, leveraging the API connector now.
Awesome. And how many rooms are you managing via the API connector, do you know?
Cisco-wise now, just because we've deprecated them, only about 18.
Wow.
How many did you start with, Kyle?
We started with about 40 plus 45 or so.
Amazing.
So not that many, but now we have, at the end of this year, we'll have about 200 Zoom rooms. So within 2 years, and really within 1 year, we've got to like 120 Zoom rooms. So as soon as we leveraged the API connector, made the transition to Zoom, consolidated our platforms, otherwise it just skyrocketed. And it was largely driven by the user experience. People walked into rooms, if it had no video now, they complained. If it had what they viewed as a legacy Cisco endpoint, they complained and asked when we were upgrading to Zoom rooms.
What do you think is the most kind of utilized feature of Zoom rooms compared to those traditional Cisco rooms? And is there anything we can do to kind of bridge that gap?
Yeah, I mean, the calendar integration was one that aligned the experience initially. And then I guess the ease of sharing is another big one. The proximity detection in the Zoom rooms was just a mind-blowing
Sure.
feature set for a lot of people.
Yep.
And so that's one of the differentiators now still in the Cisco rooms. We still have a wired HDMI connection, or you can use the web version to join to share, but it's a little bit more of a process. So the proximity share in Zoom rooms would be something nice to duplicate if possible.
Awesome. And I know we've talked a lot about your journey kind of as an admin of Zoom, right? As an advocate of Zoom and a Zoom champion. Can you talk at all about, how it has been to be an admin of the Zoom tool at your organization? What has that done for you? Is it anything that, what would you recommend for folks that are sitting out there in the same spot?
Well, I mean, honestly, you've simplified it a lot. We leveraged the Zoom dashboard and the management of the endpoints all through the Zoom portal now. So in that quadrupling of our volume of both endpoints and usage, we've actually not increased dedicated AV support at all. It's been a little bit easier to enable our other IT desktop support team just to give them limited admin rights to the portal and be able to add the notifications appropriately. So
Sure.
I think that's been one of the biggest things from a Zoom room standpoint especially, is having the appropriate staff geographically added to the notifications and proper admin rights to the portal to support the rooms.
You hit on a really great point there, which is proactive alerting based on predefined conditions, right? So the capability of a Zoom room to detect when a USB device or any other device has been disconnected or the room might go offline, you get those notifications to a distribution list that I assume is probably local to those rooms, right?
Yeah,
So-
and it's a lot more granular than something we get from TMS, room system offline, right? Or system has booted. Okay, that tells me there's a problem, but it doesn't tell me how specific that problem is.
Sure.
So from a Zoom room, hey, the microphone or speaker or camera has disconnected.
Yep.
That more granular alerting system has really helped to support as well.
Awesome.
So I heard you say your staffing has not decreased, and I know that's a fear a lot of other customers have. We get a lot of pushback sometimes from those, traditional Cisco AV guys when Zoom starts, coming into a POC. So some of them expanded into Zoom rooms. They still manage those Cisco endpoints. That's kind of where we have conference rooms. In our portal, it's conference rooms. We don't care if it's a Cisco room, a Poly room, a Lifesize room, or a Zoom room. They're conference rooms. So you kind of expanded them into all conference rooms and not just Cisco where they were limited before.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's sort of the management capabilities that the portal and the dashboard have allowed us to expand what once was more dedicated AV support to the rest of the IT organization as a whole. Something that they can kind of understand a little more, is a little more standardized and a little more easily assigned. And honestly, just the general interest too. I think people are just more jazzed about it now, and they're more actually excited to learn about conference rooms as opposed to just being like, whoa, no, I don't want to touch that.
Yep.
Which is the previous attitude, understandably, when it's something that's a little more complex and specific. So I just find that I get a lot of more generically IT folks are more excited about AV now.
Yep.
Because it's more pervasive and because it's just a little more innovative.
We all probably at one point in our career have been the guy sitting on the hot seat outside of the conference room, right, waiting for that to blow up. So,
Yeah, and if you have to access something like your VCS or TMS or something,
It's not easy to
you're not
do.
going to enable
Yeah.
the wider organization to do that, nor do they want to have that curse. So I think people are a lot more willing to actually jump in and are more excited. Literally, I have people asking to get involved in the integration and the deployment
love
and
it.
the management, as opposed to being begrudgingly accepting your
Sure.
demands.
I don't
do
want
so.
conference rooms, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome.
All right.
What have you used outside of, I know you have Zoom rooms deployed. I know we have some features there that enable, rooms with maybe less technology or no technology in them to have something in the space. Our digital signage offering, our scheduling display offering. Are you utilizing any of that for your Cisco Polycom rooms or anything like that?
We are leveraging the digital signage. We had a mechanism for, that's another platform that we consolidated actually. We had a much more complex and expensive system for digital signage that was more of a production application. Transitioned that over to the Zoom platform to centralize that management as well from a content standpoint and a support standpoint. And then the room scheduling has actually been huge. Now that I won't dive too much into it, but as Pandora was acquired by SiriusXM, we're still looking to pervade the Zoom experience across this new combined organization. But in the meantime, what they're most excited about is the free aspect of licensing for the room scheduling. So we do room scheduling for some of our actual Zoom rooms on the Pandora side, but we're actually deploying room scheduling more widely to rooms that don't necessarily have Zoom rooms yet.
Sure.
So yeah, we're leveraging pretty much the full suite.
Love it. No, that's awesome. We see a lot of that use case right there, right? You have a Cisco room and you want to put a scheduling display outside of there. It's going to tie back into that same room resource.
And I think that's a key. It's not, a lot of people think that you can't deploy a scheduling device unless it is already a Zoom room. That's not the case. As long as you have the service account established, tie it to the resource as you were doing already for leveraging your existing hardware. You can have those scheduling devices that look and act exactly like they do for Zoom rooms for a room that may have nothing.
Awesome.
That's great. Thanks, Kyle. I'd like to bring up Simon now. Simon Booth is our product architect who developed our API connector for conference rooms. You can stay up here as well, Kyle, if you like. This is going to be an open Q&A. Simon may have some more specific details he'd like to share as the brains behind this whole concept, to make conference rooms easier to use. But also, we've got a couple mics on the sides. I know we got about 10 minutes left in the session. If you want to come up and ask any questions at the mic, we can pass the mic around. It's your opportunity to get the customer, the brains behind it all, your sales engineers, to answer any questions that you may have.
Hey, I got a quick question. This might be for you, Kyle. So if you have basically a Cisco infrastructure and you're looking at trying to transition, does this mean that you still sort of have a duplicate registration? You have to pay for a subscription on the Cisco device while you're making this transition? Or do you not pay for a registered device and still go through a PSE? Is that even possible? And maybe that's a question for the Zoom team.
In my case, it kind of depends. We're doing a mixture of both. Like I said, there are some use cases where we're still registering to our VCS because we have a tie to our PBX. And there are some specific room cases where we're still doing that. So we're using up a VCS license, so to speak, in that case. But on the Zoom side, there's no licensing implication at all. So I'm doing a mixture, if that's it.
Yeah, sometimes
So if you're just, sorry, maybe I'll clarify that a little bit more. So if you're just basically a Cisco WebEx cloud service, right? So you don't have VCS, nothing on-prem, and you're really just
I can
trying to
take that.
transition. Do you have to pay for...
So basically, the cloud service is mutually exclusive with WebEx Cloud. So once you've decided to move that endpoint to Zoom, then you're no longer using the WebEx Cloud. So the only thing that you might want to retain, depending on how long that transition period is support on the hardware itself. Right. So.
Which I don't anymore.
Yeah. And I did also, so just before we get into the other questions, I just wanted to pick up on the gentleman earlier that was asking about the difference with registration. One of the things that you don't yet get, but you will get in the next, hopefully, month or so, is Zoom Phone. So traditionally we've been leveraging, and I think Carl was the same, was leveraging Call Manager or another PBX behind the scenes to do outbound and inbound PSTN calling. Obviously now we have Zoom Phone. That's getting stitched in with the API connected devices as well. So.
And shameless plug, the next session here with Polycom will actually be covering some of that Zoom Phone stuff as well. We'll be doing some demos with Zoom Phone configured on Polycom as an API connected endpoint. So stick around for that as well.
Yeah. Are you going to moderate?
Yeah, a question over on the right.
Good afternoon. We have a Lifesize and a Polycon at our operation. I can never schedule them as a host. They only come in as participants. Is that the norm? They do not have any other functions in that. I can't bring them as a host ever. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the case today. So the only things that you can control around that are for webinars. We do have the ability, and we added that in the last few months, was if you're running webinars in those rooms, you can now set your traditional conference rooms to come in as an attendee and not as a panelist in a webinar. We are working on that, so that's definitely feedback that we've heard from yourself and other customers, is to bring endpoints in as a more complete host with other features as well. So that's something we're working on.
And one other thing, again, we have several Zoom rooms that we actually schedule from our Outlook calendar, and we bring several of them into the meeting at the same time. We're not able to make one the host. We can say we give you host privileges, but whichever Zoom room comes in first takes host privileges. Has that been addressed at all?
That is still the case today. The first Zoom room to join will be host when they're all scheduled on the same meeting. That's something we take up separately and talk about any development or plans we're working around that. But you are correct. The first Zoom room in would be host.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just actually throwing one related point to that, not being a host, but joining unmuted. That was a big pain point for us when meetings were set to mute on entry, and Codex would join muted, but it wasn't a hardware mute. So you have
Yes.
to use DTMF tones to unmute, and that was very complex. So having that setting from the API connector was very helpful.
Yeah, and we're working to improve that also. So we did put that really just short-term measure to just unmute all standards-based devices as a kind of stopgap measure. But we are working on synchronizing the mute for the meeting and the muting for the endpoint. So again, that's something that's on our short-term list.
Question up front?
Question for Kyle. Were you using one-button join with your Cisco environment before?
No. We're not using WebEx Cloud registration. So no, we just hadn't set up that integration at all. And it was just not a very robust environment previous to moving to Zoom. So.
Yeah, the question up front was Kyle using one button to touch experience before Zoom with his previous configuration?
And honestly, it was mostly driven because that wasn't a feature that was available to our user base. Then we moved to Zoom, started deploying Zoom Rooms, and that was now seen as a shortcoming of our Cisco environment.
Another question up front?
Do you wanna-
So that's two questions. Number one, so we can use the API connector to basically manage all of the Cisco infrastructure that is currently there, so we can kind of do away with TMS.
Yeah, so the question was, can you use the API connector to manage the existing infrastructure? No, we eliminate the existing infrastructure. So we replicate the functionality and features of the TMS, the VCS, the Expressway, and now Call Manager, and we replace all of the infrastructure and just retain the endpoint as a native endpoint into the Zoom platform. Yeah.
Yes.
Is the API, is it a billable subscription piece, or is it a one-time purchase, or is it free with your other?
Yeah, great question. It was around the pricing and licensing for the API connector. If you have conference room connector licensing, the CRCs, you can register as many endpoints as you like. Your only constraint is connectivity is going to be based upon how many CRC licenses you have for concurrent meetings.
Keep going up there.
Hey there. So I've actually got the API connector for about a little over a month. We're in the process of shutting down all our polycoms. Oh, feedback. Trying to throw our trying to throw our Polycom infrastructure out the window by the end of the year. Kyle, I was wondering, as you're changing, what was the biggest hurdle you had? What was the biggest headache or biggest pitfall you ran into? And did you have any complicated boardroom setups? How do you deal with those? I don't know. What was your most complicated room you maybe had to deal with?
Yeah, the biggest ones for Pandora is we have several event spaces where we'll run performances, so it's a pretty complex just physical setup, external audio DSP. But honestly, in some ways it was a little easier because we had separate camera controllers that tied in. We basically just had to have a few different IOs. So basically going from like XLR to USB in. So it was a very complex scenario that I was very worried about, but actually ended up being not that difficult to convert. I mean, essentially you're replacing your existing codec with whatever it may be, a Mac or Windows device, and you just have to convert signals in and out. So I was actually more worried about some of the more complex rooms, and it was not a big problem. So I mean, literally the difference of a USB to XLR interface to have our audio mixer into the what was a codec and is now a PC. So it really has not been a challenge. It's just been deciding which rooms to tackle first.
Yeah, so in Kyle's case, he converted those rooms to Zoom rooms. When you get up to the show floor, check out Mission Control, talk to our Zoom room experts. We've got in all of our Zoom room demos up there. There's little QR codes you can scan, and they'll actually take you to our hardware guides online. We cover a lot of those rooms, those studio type rooms, the divisible rooms, the executive board rooms. Some rooms are very simple, like the appliances we saw today in the keynote, where you can just drop something in. Others are more complex with ceiling speakers and mics, Pro AV we call it. We've got design guides online for all those.
Another one I just thought of actually too, we had user experience labs. So we had a very complex initial AV design with video switchers and controls processors, and we actually eliminated all that by putting in multiple Zoom rooms. So the talkback feature from control room to observation room was no longer a complex audio DSP system, it was just multiple Zoom rooms. So in a lot of ways it simplified the hardware.
We got a question on the right, and we'll come back to the left after that.
So this may be an issue to bring up with Lifesize, but anytime we just completed crossing over all of our Lifesize units to Zoom as we threw our Lifesize service out the window. However, one kind of downfall that is a bummer that we haven't been able to find a answer for if it is coming or which aspect to go, because we get sent back and forth, is we get the calendar meeting set up on the Lifesize unit. That one button click, you join the meeting, except it's going to give us a countdown timer. If I'm trying to start at 10 minutes early, we've got a countdown timer. Is there any workaround in the future, or is that something to bring up with Lifesize, or vice versa, that we may be able to expedite that so they don't have to wait without creating a new calendar event?
Yeah, so that behavior of the endpoint is the way that the Lifesize unit works. When all we're really doing is providing it with the calendar information, and it's choosing to do that behavior. We could certainly look into if there's some kind of configuration, so we could make meetings basically extend earlier, so that if you wanted to set one up for a particular room and have like a pre-setup in a boardroom or something where you're doing kind of high-end meetings and you want to pre-test, we could definitely look into that. So yeah, if you want to see me after, and we'll take that on.
You can shoot me an email as well, and I'll follow up with you.
Thank you.
And do we have another question on the left?
Yes, the question was some of the complex rooms that we converted with a Crestron controllers. Crestron processors, definitely. And yes, in a few cases, touch panel interfaces as well. So it kind of depends on the design of the room, whether we continue to leverage that processor, or in my cases, I was trying to move away from it as much as possible. So in a lot of cases, it meant that we could do away with that and not need the control system that was leveraging the video switcher, audio DSP, etc. So yes, we've supplanted those. Yeah, I mean, you're getting into the granular use cases. It totally depends, but the answer is you could go either way. You can still leverage a Crestron control system with a Zoom room, or depending on the design, you can do away with the need for a Crestron control system.
Any other questions? Another one at the mic?
We have multiple API connectors deployed. Can you deploy multiple calendar credentials
Yes.
to different APIs?
Yes.
Okay.
See us or send us a note, because
Yeah.
it's complicated, but we can.
Yeah, I didn't see where I could say add another.
Yeah, there's an advanced configuration option, and typically customers want to do that either to use different credentials for executive accounts or something like that that might have permissions. So yes is the answer.
Okay.
So yes.
On the right, Mike?
Yeah, so it's relative to proximity. Saw a real cool demo on the integration of proximity to a Zoom room, right? From a PC to a mobile to a room. Mm-hmm. We have Cisco cloud rooms right now, SX80s and some room kits. Are you able to, let's say we go ahead and move forward with a transition to Zoom, are you able to integrate and leverage that proximity that's already built into those Cisco units?
Kind of, and not yet. So we've certainly done some work to try to reverse engineer that and make it work, and we're continuing to do that. Obviously, that's a proprietary technology. There are other proprietary technologies that we have figured out and made work, so that's definitely an option. In the short term, we are going to be adding a sharing key option, so that on the Cisco endpoint, when it's in a call, it will show you the sharing key, so that it makes it much easier for a user to join. So I think one of the challenges we have at the moment is you have to kind of figure out what the meeting ID is and go to share.zoom US and do all of that. We're making it much easier to do it from the Zoom client and just enter the sharing key, which is already on the screen. So that's kind of a short-term measure that will hopefully help, but having it fully automatic and using the ultrasonic technique is something that's later down the road.
So you would use a Zoom client with that SX80, for example?
Yes. So if you wanted to share into this room, right, it would be in the meeting. You would open up your Zoom client, click on share, and it would, in that box, you would just type in the sharing key that's on the screen.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. And I think we're up on
Just one quick question for Kyle, if you don't mind. At Pandora, when you actually have the large events, the CIO or the CEO town hall, quarterly meetings, that sort of thing, what are you using? Are you using Zooms? platform, or using a different sort of?
We were using something else. Now we're using Zoom Webinar. We use Zoom for everything.
And you're able to pipe out the video and have a two-way sort of dialogue with another site.
Oh yeah, the
Distance.
control of the Zoom Webinar is actually way easier than using an MCU to connect and pipe into a webinar platform, etc. It's made my life way easier.
All right, thank you, everybody. We do need to wrap up. We got another session coming up. Again, if you want to stay for trios, please do. Josh, Simon, myself. Simon actually getting ready for the next session. Josh and I and Kyle will stay off to the side. If you have any final questions, feel free to come on up. We appreciate you joining us today. Thank you.